My name is Dr. Kwasu David Tembo in the ELCW department. I'm joined today with Martin Romberg, composer and musician, who has interpreted, in my opinion, and has offered some of the best interpretations of Tolkien's Silmarillion in specific areas related to English 336 that we focus on in our syllabus, the Einarlundina, the music of the Ainur, at the beginning of the Silmarillion, which acts as Tolkien's cosmogony for the entirety of Middle-earth. And it's a distinct privilege for me to have you to really kind of express how it is that you went about interpreting this material as literature and as music. And your insights, I think, would prove exceedingly valuable to both myself as a deep adherent and appreciator of Tolkien's work in this particular text, but also to anybody else who's interested in engaging in this text as well. So thank you very much for joining me, Martin. How are you doing?
My pleasure. Real privilege to speak about these things. It is the interest around Tolkien is sort of a never-ending energy that you think that he will be, depleted, but apparently not. So there is some, and I hope we might touch on that. There is some sort of eternal energy that goes, that turns around here, that seems to be, to find relevance, renewed relevance for young listeners and readers as well. And that's very interesting to observe. So I'm really glad for that.
Excellent. I mean, and I think you're so right. And I think this phrase of eternal energy or recurrence in some way, it being resonant across time, across a variety of different socioeconomic backgrounds, variety of different sort of cultural milieus, is something quite special, I think, in the history of literature and elsewhere in terms of media. So I think maybe the best way of orienting some of our discussion here is around maybe 4 general categories. And I'll just throw them out there and see what you think. Issues and debates concerning choices, interpretation or hermeneutics, expression, and meaning. And maybe to get into those 4 areas, I might just start very simply and say, what's your relationship with the Silmarillion? When did you read it? What do you think about it? How do you feel about it as a piece of literature? What does it mean to you in your life?
Well, this story behind the Silmarillion, I mean, it starts long before that, right?
Sure.
So the nice thing about Tolkien is that he wrote books on several levels. So you have The Hobbit, which is really adapted for, we can say children. It's also for adults, but let's just say that the child in you, or
Sure.
the actual child.
Sure.
And then you have The Lord of the Rings, which is sort of this transition literature between child and adulthood.
Yeah, well put.
And then you have the Silmarillion, which is really, the mature, eternal biblical text, right? For the mature reader, let's say. So he has all this spectrum covered. And I believe that I read all those texts progressively. So you can't exclude one without the other. So, as a child, I read The Hobbit. As a 16-year-old, I read The Lord of the Rings, and as a 26-year-old, which is just the age where you are, on the brink of adulthood. At least in modern times, in the old times, you were actually an old man when you were 26.
It's true. You're in your dotage.
Now you're barely an adult, let's say.
Exactly.
And in this exact age, I read the Silmarillion for the first time, and it was a very strange experience. I actually went to India at that time. I saw, sort of a bonus for myself after long years of studying music. 2 months in India, and I find myself in an old empty hotel, and I just borrowed this old moist, like with curly paper, paper version of the Silmarillion from an Indian friend of mine, and of all places, right? And I read that, like, I stayed in this hotel bed with the spiders and snakes and Indian ants and everything around me, and I just read this thing, and I was like, oh yeah, so okay, so this is it. This is like what he does is that he taps into there's a literary form in this. It is like to use archaic, timeless language, which is biblical, but at the same time, yeah, you know what I mean. It's not biblical at the same time, but the tone of the language is certainly biblical.
Yeah.
And he taps into this universalness that transcends time and space. And it is like when you read that, compared to, for example, the Bible or other holy texts, it is refreshing and old at the same time. So you're like, as a 26-year-old, you have the feeling of being introduced to a new universe, and at the same time, it's just all elements from our common cultural heritage, let's say, incorporated into that. So that's a quite powerful combination.
I think
And
you're
it's
absolutely
very
right.
authentic, and it's very realistic as well. It's like when you read it, you sort of think, yeah, that this is probably true. I mean, this probably happened, or some, on the other side of the galaxy, as they would say in Star Wars.
Sure. No, I think you're
So
right. I think it has this deep resonance because perhaps, as you say, it really taps into a tone or a type of diction in presenting a cosmogony. I mean, everybody nowadays is very tapped into this idea of world building. It happens across media. It happens in video games and apps, AI, all sorts of different manifestations thereof. But there's something quite timeless about the language that Tolkien uses that situates the entire cosmogony, as you say, refreshingly near in time, but at the same time distantly far in time. So it resonates with Judeo-Christian texts, with Sanskrit texts, with the steles found, for example, in Assyria and so on, but also touching into poetic Eddas and other mythopoetic systems of Homer and so on. So it has, as you say, this kind of interesting universality in its myth making, but there's something very, very fresh and vital about it that kind of keeps it resonant, to use a musical term. I'm the same way, and I also went through the journey of Tolkien in the same order as you. I came to the Silmarillion very late. For me, it was Lord of the Rings first, and then I read The Hobbit, and then I read the Silmarillion. But in reading and encountering the Silmarillion, especially the Aina Lundala, as a deep appreciator of music, again, no pun, it really resonated with me, and it made sense in this very believable, tangible way that the idea that to emanate sound or to intone sound could be generative, could be creative in this way, and the scale of that creation could be universal.
Yes, and I think that when you speak about the Aulindale, sorry, I have the Norwegian pronunciation.
I love it. I love it.
Which is sort of close to Elven. By
it
the way.
is. It is.
Yeah. It also reminds me of the Renaissance and early Baroque thinkers. If you take Johannes Kepler, for example,
exactly,
who wrote the harmony of the spheres.
Yeah, and the Song of the Earth.
For the Renaissance human, the resonance and the acoustical principle and musical principle were entirely connected to cosmology. So it is not by chance that Tolkien actually quite boldly uses a quite refreshing, choral opening of his whole mythology. So it's like God sings, or the gods sings the universe into being, and that's actually very it's very Renaissance as well. So also like he also incorporates all sorts of things from the human history, and that's the brilliant thing about it, because the thing is that all these things need renewal, and we know that now more than any time in history. I think people are just asking themselves, how can we refresh our societies, our civilization? How can we introduce new ideas without cutting the bonds to the old?
I think you're right.
That the mythology of Tolkien is quite interesting to ponder upon. In doing this, to take all the traditional elements but put them into space, put them into cosmological perspective, to make them neutral. Because the problem is, if I come to you and I want to preach I don't know, some Protestant dogmas, or I don't know, some Hindu verses, or this or that, or whatever it is, a political right and left and up and down, I will come with biases, and you will be defensive with prejudgments, and the dialogue will be incredibly difficult, no matter who's talking to whom.
You're right.
So the thing is that creativity, if we can allow ourselves to be creative with historical material, I think that will be a release trigger for a lot of the malaises in our current civilization. So yeah.
I really couldn't have put it more astutely. I think that's such a great observation and really well put. And perhaps it even explains or adds to why the Ainulundala, to pronounce it in your fashion, is so resonant by virtue of the fact that it extrudes, as you say, all of these different cultural elements from humanity en masse, Vedic text, this, that, and the other, and then sets it to music, which is a far more universal way of communication or converse or shared communal experience, as opposed to a sort of dogmatic, doctrinaire approach that's ideologically based. This, we looked at Kepler recently this past week, but also harkening back to my, provocations to my students about the relationship between the Apollinian and the Dionysian in this Nietzschean idea. This idea that the Dionysian, the dithyramb, has this sort of universal intensity, that vibrations, even just vibrations of the air, have some kind of universal response in human beings, irregardless of what ideology they might subscribe to. That music has this kind of skeleton key quality to unlock minds and hearts the world over. And maybe it makes sense to set that cosmogony there, as opposed to anywhere fundamentally linguistic, though he does use language to describe this music. So maybe as a composer and as a musician and as a reader, how does the musical quality of what Tolkien describes relate to its literary form? Could you imagine the music as you read it, or was it difficult to imagine the music as you read it?
Well, that's a good question. But first of all, I would like to say that there has been some new research recently around the development of our verbal capacities
Yes.
versus our musical capacities. And
Yeah.
there are some people who claim now that music might precede language.
Yes.
As a form of communication. And that can be proven, I believe, by I'm just speaking about this because I think it's very important.
Please.
I don't know if you have children, but when you have one day, if you don't have them, you observe that when you have a baby, a small baby, there's no possibility to speak with it verbally.
Correct.
The child doesn't understand language. So instinctively, what you do to calm the baby down is to sing for it. So this is like what the mothers and also fathers do in order to communicate with the baby. That's kind of an instinctive gesture that you do because you have no way of making the babies understand anything what you say to it, right? And it only screams back to you. So the only form of communication you have is to sing to the baby. So that indicates actually that music might precede verbal structures as a way of communicating things. And there are also many other aspects around that. So it means that with music, you can communicate. Any human understands music wherever he is on the planet. Like you can play Mozart symphony to a Chinese farmer. He might like it or not like it. That's another question. But he would certainly react to it, understand a lot of it, and respond to it
Absolutely
in a much more vivid and understandable way than if you speak English to him and he does not understand English, right?
Absolutely, far more immediate.
So this idea of a universal language in music is extremely important, and it might also play an evolutionary role that we are about to find out. So this is very important.
Agreed.
About the texts and the relations to music in general. So the thing about the Silmarillion is that it is a mythic text, right? It works with mythical components, mythical elements, and mythical language.
Mm-hmm.
When you dive into the mythical, you dive into something which is beyond the individual, because it's about shared images and memories, potentially also scientific, by the way, that we share interculturally and also intergenerationally, which is also important, because the intercultural thing is like on the horizontal level, but the intergenerational thing is also on the vertical level. That's very important. You
Well
communicate also with your ancestors as well as in time now.
Well said.
And this mythical components, they are like small keys with whom you open all those sort of doors, also back in time, right? So when you start to ponder about these things as a composer, you become less and less a composer, and you become more and more a listener about what's already out there in the universe, and how can you just catch these butterflies that flies around there in cosmos, and you just have to catch
Yeah.
them and just transmit them as a comprehensible musical melody. So and they come by themselves. They're like cats. Suddenly there is a butterfly just coming on your shoulder, and you're just
Sure.
just catch it.
Sure.
So that's the process, really. And this happens when you work with mythic material. The mythic material has a will of its own, and it has a life of its own. And it's like, what you need to do as a composer, just try to listen as carefully as you can. It's like, what's going on over there, and is there some melody going on over there? And so you're not really creating anything. And frankly, I don't think that Tolkien created so much either. I think that he just listened to voices from I don't know, below or above or from the side. I can't say that, but
that's such a fantastic way of describing the relationship between music and the text, specifically the type of text that it is. I love the metaphor of the butterfly in the cosmos that you try to listen out for and then capture or act as an amanuensis for, or a conduit. You're sort of singing through you in so many ways that you're more finely attuned to the universe and producing some semblance of the music, much in the same way that when Ulmo or the elves are talking about Ulmo, they say that in no substance else in Middle Earth, save water, is there the remnant or the echo of the music. So this idea of conduits, of listening, of making yourself open and available for the music to resound and be intoned through your being, and act as a conduit or a hinge between the cosmic and the communal is such a beautiful way of rendering that particular idea. But it's interesting that Tolkien describes, when he tries to describe the sound of the Ainur's chorus, whether they're singing in concert together or before Melkor enters with his own themes, which are, discordant and so on, he tries to give the reader ostensibly tangible reference to music making implements, viols, lutes. He does, he says that Melkor's theme is like a few notes, repetitive notes, braying on brass, on trumpets. And so when you read that, and when you said to yourself, I'm going to try and actually allow this particular text and its suggestion of music and my own sensibility and openness to it and the cosmos through it, to try and do so in musical form, did you think to yourself, maybe I should stick to these instruments that he intimates, or I could just veer away from those and just see what happens? Did you feel constrained, is really the question, by anything that Tolkien set down in terms of the music and how it should be or could be played or interpreted?
You mean very technical? Actually, no. However, that said, when you speak about the trumpet and Melkor, because I haven't read that text for a long time, actually.
Sure.
We did record the whole Silmarillion cycle in Germany in 2024, so I'm actually editing now, so it's going to be released on on album pretty soon.
I can't wait. I can't wait.
There is actually there is in the second movement, so when Melkor is introduced, there is actually the trumpets introducing him also when you say it, but that's like, I didn't think of that text. It just comes naturally. So the thing is that if you obsess too much about what Tolkien said, you forget what he listened to when he wrote the text. What you need to do is to try to connect yourself with the same source as he was connected with when he wrote the texts. Because if not, you will have a secondary influence on what you're doing. And it is not necessarily good. It could be, like this story with the trumpet. It could be like, so we listen both of us to Melkor. Obviously, he's some sort of a trumpet guy, right? But this is just obvious. This is what Melkor tells us. This is not what Tolkien tells me about Melkor. Melkor tells me that. So you have to tune into the original source, which is beyond time and space. So that's interesting.
I love that.
The question is, trust your intuition. Your intuition is the guiding star for all these things, and when it feels right, it probably is. So my experience is that, like, if you feel this is right, it probably is right. So
I love that. I think that's such a beautiful, and I think very practical and insightful, and I think a very realistic approach to expressions of any kind in any media, to trust your instincts in a kind of Occam's razor sort of way. The simplest outcome is most likely the true one. And the simplest outcome is that it feels right to you or that you're being pulled in this particular way intuitively. It might feel strange, it might feel a little bit daunting or frightening by virtue of the sort of socialization and the scaffolding around what should and should not be done, but your intuitions will typically not lead you astray or errant in any particular fashion. And I think to me, that's really amazing to hear coming from you, because the piece, for example, I think you released it years ago, dealing with Laurelin and Telperion, the two trees. The way in which the sort of like thematics and leitmotifs kind of correspond to one another, you can hear the distinction as if you were hearing the sort of resonance of two different trees, but then the way in which the melodies meld, the way in which they harmonize with one another, makes me see both the golden and the silver light sort of commingled as it was in Valinor and so on. And I'm like, but it feels so effortless. And this is testament to, I think, and I don't use this term lightly, your genius in this respect, because I think that's just a fantastically accurate, it just feels so right, the interpretive approach that you brought to bear. And I guess I could follow up maybe even with a final question to say, in your recording of this Silmarillion cycle, your most recent recording of 2014, what were some guiding ideas, images, feelings, principles that you brought to bear? And what does it mean to you to have this body of work interpreted and recorded in sound?
It's incredibly important, but don't forget that this is orchestral pieces. Like orchestras are hard to get; they're expensive.
Yeah.
You need to move heaven and earth to get stuff like this done, actually.
That's incredible.
So I'm very happy of having gotten it in the box, as we say. There are some refreshments that I've done with the scores and so on, but that's anecdotal. Your observation about the mixing of the lights is very accurate. There is one whole part in that symphonical poem, which is the technical name for this sort of symphonical depiction of a poetical story. There is actually a mixing of the lights. It's a whole part of that piece. So that's a very good observation. And I wanted to say about this. To play with the material and to trust yourself. Like, Tolkien is a humanist. There is something in this literature that profoundly believes in humans with all their flaws, right?
Mm-hmm. Well said.
Tolkien had a lot of flaws. You know that after his death, they found a room full of manuscripts and loose papers, sheets and ideas and poems and half-written text and chaos. I mean, he wasn't perfect either. I mean, his son spent his whole life, Christopher Tolkien, peace be with him, by the way, he left us a year ago.
He did.
He spent his whole life making sense to his father's work. And this is something else. When you are an intuitive writer, which I think that Tolkien actually was, because when you do so many sketches that you never finish, you have this room of ideas scattered.
Absolutely.
And thousands of pages of just ideas and vision and kind of this ecstatic dream world which just pours in. Well, one human life might not be enough to make sense of it. You might need one more human life and perhaps even a second one, to fulfill the whole project. And it reminds me of the cathedrals, the people who put down the first stones for the cathedral.
Yeah.
They were perfectly aware that they would never see the end of that cathedral because, it takes 500 years to build. So this is kind of a similar project. And back to the orchestral works, this is a very important project for many reasons, and we're going to promote it also for the regular program audience, all of Europe and America as well. We have a lot of job to do when it comes to America, Canada, where this project is, I think larger unknown still, and I think there is a certain potential here because classical music, as it happens, also is an identity crisis, and they search for their path out of this incredible dissonance between just recycling old works and presenting too aggressive, too modern new pieces, which is strange for the audience. And So I believe that this might have a chance to have a soothing effect also in classical music, and will certainly work for that purpose.
I think that's such a brilliant coda upon which to end. And I as an appreciative listener, I mean, to our listeners and viewers, I reached out to you, Martin, in 2015, I believe. I mean, I was having these sorts of experiences and thoughts of sort of cosmogony and space and longing and loss and the forlorn and hope and a humanistic belief in potential and progress, or at least truth in and through Superman when I was writing my dissertation and thinking about, how could I, so much of the way in which I imagine this character's sort of mythopoetics is musical in my mind. And then I was listening to a lot of your work in general that really backgrounded in so many ways soundtracked my doctoral work. And I just reached out to Martin to just say, I really thank you for producing this work. And I'm really, really grateful and thankful for you taking on the entire Silmarillion song cycle. I cannot wait to hear it. I cannot wait to hear the poetic and the musical combined in this beautifully productive tension and ambiguity, which is a lodestar that we follow in this particular course. And what you said about this idea that it might have taken laying the groundstone, knowing full well that you would not see the completion of the buttress, let alone the entire apse or the entire roof of the cathedral, but still doing that work with true intent and rigor and precision and full faith, reminds me of something Miles Davis once said in an interview. He said that it took him his whole life to play like himself. This idea that it's an ongoing process of discovery, to follow your intuitions and to really trust yourself and others whom with you might sing, who might have different ideas that might clash or concord, but can be recapitulated and reformed into this deeply resonant and true music as individuals, as writers, as readers, as listeners, more precisely. So I can't wait to hear it. And I'm really, really glad for your insights on these matters and others.
Thank you so much. And could I just add a small piece of publicity? Because
please, the floor is yours.
Friday in 2 weeks, on the 14th of February, we release a new album. This is only solo piano music. Well, only.
Oh, okay.
And this will be the release of the second part of the Balla Quenta. The ladies, because I wrote a collection of piano pieces just based on the male characters. And as you could, foresee that some eyebrows raised why on earth I did not treat the ladies with the same, so after many years of maturing and adapting to the more female voices of the Valar, I wrote that collection, and it's going to be released in 2 weeks. So for anyone who are interested, connect on social media and Spotify and all that. So we will release it in a couple of weeks. So tune in for that, please.
What a treat! I'll certainly be tuning in myself. And maybe even just a cheeky final question: of those compositions in the new representation of the female voices of the Valar, do you have a favorite Valar? As in general, in terms of a concept, male or female, embodied or intoned in that way? And do you have a favorite piece that represents that in your mind?
Oh, what a question.
It might be an unfair one, but...
Well, that they all exist because of each other. If you take one piece out of the puzzle, it sort of collapses, right? But... yeah.
It's a hard
one. I can't answer that question because they belong together, all of them.
They really do.
It's like the Knights of the Round Table. You can't just take one of them out.
It's true. Otherwise, the circle collapses. And the great music. I love where Ilúvatar says to Melkor, you think, well, first you went searching for the secret fire, but it's mine and mine alone. And you thought that the theme that you introduced in conflict with my own was actually enough to suppress or undo it. And yet you've proven yourself my own instrument in releasing or realizing even further aspects of the music that you yourself as an individual could not see. And this idea of the Ainur, growing slowly in the comprehension of each other's music, because they only comprehended that piece that of the mind of Ilúvatar, that it's almost a frequency that they could hear, and it took a long time for them to hear their other frequencies representing Ilúvatar's essence or eminence. So I love the fact that you don't you resist the idea to sort of discretize them, which is fair. And
I'm
I think
so sorry,
so. It's a cheeky question on my part.
But I would have to defend Melker a little bit as well. You know that.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
We need the little dissonance, like that's also the human element, because imagine a world without Melker, where everything is harmonious, you know, symmetrical, geometrical, perfect balance.
Yeah.
It would be a quite boring world, right?
It'd be quite dull.
We need one spice in the soup. So the thing is about proportions, and music certainly needs some dissonance to make the consonants meaningful. Because you know, if music is only consonant, then it becomes essentially elevator music. It's just there to make some atmosphere, so you feel well. You know, when you get the Thai massage, everything's atmospheric music, but that's for the massage. It's for you to relax. But we need this tiny pinch of you know, pepper in the soup, and that's what Melker is for. And even that, if that creates some suffering, we need to portion that out and use it for what it is, namely a life-giving spark for this short existence, to make let's say a balanced meaning between order and chaos. So I would like to, you know, give Melker some credit for his dissonance.
That's a very important thing to mention, and a fantastic note, no pun intended, upon which to end. So I'll just thank our listeners and our viewers. Please make sure that you look out for the. Does the second batch of piano pieces have a name?
Yeah, it's the Valaquenta 2. Yeah.
Okay, so please look out for Valaquenta 2 on Spotify, YouTube, wherever it is that you get your music. I'll thank Martin Romberg one more time for just your insights and the pleasure of your conversation. I really appreciate these conversations we have. So thanks for taking the time.
Thank you so much, Kwasu. Thank you.
Cheers.